Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello again, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of Binnall of America Audio, Season 1. It is December 10th, 2005. We continue this week with Adam Gorightly, Part 2 of 2. We discuss Kerry Thornley, 60s counterculture icon who got wrapped up in the Kennedy assassination investigation and subsequently went pretty bonkers. It's a fascinating cautionary tale for anyone on the fringes of esoterica, and we have a lively discussion on that and a host of other topics as well. Here's a little bit about Adam Gorightly if you did not catch last week's episode. He is a self-described crackpot historian, the author of The Shadow over Santa Susana, Black Magic, Mind Control, and the Manson Family Mythos, and The Prankster and the Conspiracy, the story of Kerry Thornley and how he met Oswald and inspired the counterculture. He's also the author of the new book, The Beast of Adam Gorightly, Collected Rantings, 1992 to 2004. Adam has been a guest on radio talk shows across the U.S. and Canada, and his articles have appeared in numerous publications such as The Excluded Middle, UFO Magazine, Paranoia, and Steam Shovel Press. You can contact Adam at your own risk at www.adamgorightly.com, and that is spelled ADAMGORIGHTLY.com. This interview was conducted on December 1st, 2005. Adam Gorightly, Part 2 of 2 on Binnall of America Audio, Season 1.
All right, well, let's move on to The Prankster and the Conspiracy. This one I found pretty interesting. We're just sort of now maybe like a week or two past the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. I was listening to a lot of the programs on the radio that covered it, waiting to hear about Kerry Thornley because I was reading the book at the time. So it's good that we can get a chance to talk about him today.
Yeah.
Let me do a little bio of my own on Kerry Thornley, and then you can correct me and explain, flesh it out for me.
Okay.
Well, Kerry Thornley, he was born in like the late 30s. He grew up, where did he grow up?
Whittier, California, Southern California.
Grew up in Southern California, and then he tried, he was kind of a nerdy kid. He ended up, tried going to college, but it didn't last too long, and then he ended up going to join the Marines.
You are correct, sir.
Thank you. Yes, he joined the Marines, and while in the Marines, he was in the Marines, stationed in Japan with Lee Harvey Oswald, of all people, and actually sort of became his friend, one of Lee Harvey Oswald's few friends in the Marines. Then he came back to the States in the early 60s and formed a faux religion of sorts with a couple of his friends, and that grew into something big we'll talk about as we get into this. And then, of course, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, so the mainstream says, by Lee Harvey Oswald, and that sort of made Kerry Thornley a sort of unique character in American history because he had known Oswald for so long, and his life sort of tied in with Oswald a lot. And then as the investigations into the Kennedy assassination picked up, he became convinced that he actually was part of the conspiracy after all, and slowly sort of went crazy. And that's the thumbnail sketch of his life. Now you can take the ball here and run with it.
I would say he sort of went crazy for a while, but then he kind of went uncrazy towards the end of his life, pretty much, from what I've gathered from talking to the folks that knew him towards the end of his life. He was still a bit paranoid about life in general, but didn't hit the extreme that it did in the late 70s when he really came to believe that he'd been a patsy like Lee Harvey Oswald, involved in unwittingly in the Kennedy assassination, and that he had been basically mind controlled and somehow had been sucked into all the craziness surrounding the assassination.
All right. Now, how did you even get interested in Kerry Thornley in the first place? Because, like I said, he's sort of a fringe character, but of course, that's probably how you got into him, right?
Yeah. When I first got involved with, once again, it goes back to the Zine movement, the underground press. In the late 80s, I started picking up, got exposed to oddities, underground magazines, and Kerry Thornley was a name I saw pop up time and time again, all these various obscure zines floating around out there, and I really, at that time, wasn't quite sure, what to make of this guy who was just writing about these crazy theories and also talking about the Church of Subgenius and all these other odd things, the Discordian Society. So anyway, one of those names I kept seeing, and it was kind of registered back there. And then later on in the early 90s, a book came out called, I believe it was titled The 60 Greatest Conspiracy Theories. Might not have the title exact, but it was written by Mangan and Whalen. And one of the chapters in there was about Kerry Thornley, and basically how Thornley, once again claimed he had been unwittingly sucked into the Kennedy assassination, and how he was a kind of guinea pig to some type of mind control that Oswald was also involved with, and that ultimately he was a Nazi breeding experiment, and that his family, his mom and dad, were involved with this whole thing, and it was anyway a pretty strange and interesting story. Afterwards, I heard Jonathan Mangan, who had written that piece, was kicking around the idea of writing a book about Kerry Thornley, and I thought, man, okay, I'll be ready to buy that.
Yeah.
Whenever it hits the shelf. But that never happened. Over the years, I had started to correspond with Thornley, and learn more and more about him, and started taking some notes, and I got to the point where once I had enough background material, I decided to go ahead and write the book.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So, all right, let me start here with the first sort of question I had, and that was on the Discordian Society. Now, he formed that with a friend of his. Obviously, he probably never thought it would get as big as it did. Sort of, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Discordian Society was, and then how it sort of evolved into into what it is, like sort of now, I guess,
It basically came out of some philosophical discussions that Kerry Thornley had with his friend Greg Hill back in a bowling alley in Yorba Linda, California, in the late 50s. And somewhere along the line, they decided to hatch or create, or it was revealed to them that this religion called, based on the worship of the Greek goddess of discord, Eris, and they named their society or this religion the Discordian Society, and based on the worship of the goddess Eris. And basically it was a put-on of all organized religion, kind of just a spoof. These two young lads, and they were in their late teens at that point, these two lads came up with this. And so that's where it was in the late 50s. He talked about after high school, Kerry went into the Marines, met Oswald, started writing a book about Oswald prior to the Kennedy assassination, which is a curiosity. Anyway, during this time, they kind of continued writing funny letters back and forth to themselves about the Discordian Society, and other people started getting involved with it. They eventually came up with Bible of Discordian called the Principia Discordia, which was by and large Greg Hill's baby, even though Thornley contributed to it and other people started contributing to it. The first run was like 5 copies, but over the years they started putting out more, got out there, and it got picked up by people in the counterculture. And it was kind of a art experiment, say, or a kind of group experiment that other people got involved with. So each edition of the Principia Discordia evolved and became something bigger with different people getting involved. Later on, Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea and folks like this picked up on it and got involved with it. And so by the late 60s, early 70s, it became pretty much a phenomena within the counterculture, and with the release of Wilson and Shea's The Illuminatus trilogy, they gave a nod of their heads to Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley, and actually the first book in the Illuminatus series was dedicated to them. During this whole period, various editions of the Principia Discordia, it was totally underground. It was never picked up by a major publisher until years and years later.
Yeah.
And so that, in a nutshell, it kind of talks about the history of the Discordian Society. But besides, people being involved and working on the Principia Discordia, they're also involved with a number of different pranks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And, basically just screwing with the establishment.
Yeah, so it was
that was another function of the Discordian Society.
So it was
basically bring about the collapse of society through humorous means. And of course, what better religion to engineer that than one that's dedicated and worships the goddess of chaos and discord.
Exactly. So it sort of started like as an in-joke and then grew into like a bigger in-joke amongst a lot of people in the counterculture.
And it basically, or eventually, got out of hand at one point, at least in Kerry Thornley's eyes, that he'd helped unleash something that got out of his control and brought too much chaos into his life. As he was quoted as saying one time, if he knew it was going to bring all this weirdness into his life, he would have picked Venus instead.
Yeah, I remember that quote from the book, yeah. Now, what was I found this kind of fascinating, the significance of the number 23 in the Discordian religion.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to that a little bit, because that was really interesting. It was odd.
Well, they kind of picked up on that from William Burroughs, the author, who looked into the 23 enigma and just found a lot of weird occurrences surrounding the number 1 having to do with a flight 23 or a shipwreck 23, where the number 23 kept popping up. And so there's some weird paranormal, whatever, synchronistic things going on with the number 23. And so this got picked up on by the Discordian Society, and I think it's a common thing. People who've started looking in at the number 23 start investigating this. In their own lives, they start seeing the number 23 show up anywhere, and it, perhaps it's just a form of programming ourselves to look for something in particular, and all of a sudden we start seeing it popping up all over the place. I remember I lent a friend of mine Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger a few years ago, where he talks about the 23 Enigma in that book, and all of a sudden my friend started seeing it popping up everywhere, and it kind of wigged him out, and he gave me the book back half finished.
Oh, man. Now, how did this Discordia, how did it, like, spread around? Like, were they all just hanging out in California at the time?
No, they were across the country, and Bob Wilson was in Chicago, and you had different people in New Orleans, and it was just they met by however means. A lot of the Discordian members never actually met each other. The only contact they had were these letters or different. A lot of times, for instance, Greg Hill would come up with some kind of funny collage, and he'd send it to the next person on the list. They'd get it, they'd add something to it, add it to the next person on the list. And a lot of the folks involved in the Discordian Society on this mailing list, they didn't use their real name. Kerry Thornley was a lot of things, the Bull Goose of Limbo, Omer Khayyam Ravenhurst, Greg Hill was Mal Eclipse the Younger. You had different handles folks were using, so some of these people never really knew who they were talking to or who they were involved with, which made it all the more curiouser and more fun.
Well, I was going to say, you kind of touched on something that I had thought when I read the book too. I was like, is that sort of now like a contributor to your use of the name Gorightly? Is that like is that sort of an homage in some ways?
Actually, during the course of working on the book, I met with a lot of the original members of the Discordian Society, and the core group. They all knew each other. It was Bob Wilson and Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill once again, and Bob Newport and Louise Lacey. These folks who were, not only involved in the Discordian Society, but were really involved in the counterculture movement. And, at one time or another, they adopted Discordian names. And, that was the whole thing behind the Discordian Society. When are you ready to become a pope? And the answer is when you say you are. And so during the course of talking to these folks, we came across a lot of the original material and some of the old Pope cards, which I started distributing over the years. And so eventually, Gorightly wasn't a Discordian name, but I came up with my own Discordian handle, which is the Wrong Reverend Houdini Kundalini of the Church of Unwavering Indifference. And Louise Lacey, who is known as Lady Il Fab in the Discordian Society, really enjoyed that name. Louise's handle, Lady Il Fab, interestingly enough and humorously enough, came from an encounter she had with Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver in the late 60s. She worked on counterculture magazine, Ramparts, and she was an editor there, and Cleaver was involved with the magazine. And really she was pretty good friends with Cleaver and worked with him on some of the stuff he was involved with for Ramparts. But Louise is a very strong-willed and forceful person. She won't. She'll tell you where it's at. And I guess one time, and she's also an anarchist. And at one point, I guess she got Cleaver riled up, and he called her a fucking anarchist bitch. And so that's how she got her FAB handle, Lady L Fab.
That's a great story. It was sort of like you'd spread it around to the different people around the country and send a letter to the all the people sort of add their own sort of stuff into it.
Yeah, they'd have what they called something Jake Day, where Greg Hill orchestrated a lot of this stuff. He'd send out a letter to the list saying, on this date, send some funny, crazy, pointless, weird something to this person here who maybe is a magazine editor for some conservative publication. They did that with, for instance, the John Birch Society, and one of the things the Scordian Society did was resurrect the Bavarian Illuminati. I believe from all the research I've done, they started talking about the Illuminati once again, that they were the conspiracy of all conspiracy and they were behind everything. And during that period, the John Birch Society was getting into these stories about the Bavarian Illuminati. So, Thornley and Wilson, all these guys started sending letters claiming to be part of the Illuminati, to the John Birch Society magazine, just to screw with them all the more. So, that was some of the projects they were involved with. And I talk about it in the book, Kerry, Thornley in Cahoots, with Robert Anton Wilson, who was an editor at Playboy, and it was actually edited the Playboy Forum. They planted a letter and an answer in one of the editions, basically creating this mythology about the Illuminati, that they had behind all the major political assassinations. And so it's created this whole mythology, and you're not sure how much they actually were involved with this, how much they're really truth there is behind all these legends of the Bavarian Illuminati. But these are the type of projects they're involved with, basically to create myths and to expand people's consciousness.
So you think it can be compared to sort of like groups that form up on the internet now, with how they correspond? They might not ever meet each other, but... Oh,
exactly, yeah. That, what they were doing, the internet was the next obvious evolution or next step, that sort of stuff they're involved with, with all the different paranormal or whatever kind of news groups you want to get involved with. That back then when they were involved with it, you had quite a time lapse sending letters across the country. Everything's very immediate these days. Yeah. But yeah, they were definitely a precursor to what has come after them.
And how prevalent do you think was the drug use amongst this group of people when they were creating and sort of passing along the Discordia movement, when they were moving it along? Was it as prevalent as one would suspect, or was that sort of like an overblown myth of the 60s?
Well, it was different back then. When you talk about drug use, I think everybody who was involved in the counterculture during that period experimented with LSD and other things, but their involvement, I don't think, was rampant. They did as much experimentation with pot or whatever as anybody else did. It definitely influenced, what they did, but it kind of came with the territory back then. It was all part of the experience.
Yeah. How mainstream was Thornley in the 60s before he became famous for being associated with Oswald? Was he just sort of like, was he a big name in the counterculture movement?
He wasn't a big name, but he probably should have been eventually. He was involved, for instance, with the libertarian movement. He was really a pivotal player in the early 60s. He examined a lot of different political philosophies and things and ideologies, and got involved with the libertarian movement, which was pretty conservative in the early 60s, and he got involved with the counterculture, and kind of one of the first persons who got involved in combining anarchy and libertarianism. So he was basically trying to pull together people from the left end of the political spectrum to the, and bringing in the people from the right, the more conservatives, and basically trying to bring these political spectrums together, which I think he was ahead of his time, and he used to have great parties where, when he was living in Watts at his house, he'd, just bring in a colorful cast of characters, hippies and conservatives, and try to just getting some open discussions going. So he was involved with that. I think he was ahead of his time there. He helped organize some of the human beings, that, which were big events. The first big psychedelic dancing in the street events that happened, but he was never known nationally as like an Abby Hoffman or a Jerry Rubin or one of those guys. But he was definitely known of in the underground. Never became a household name by any stretch of the imagination.
This is kind of asking you. Now, so he was in the military, and he's in there with Oswald, and they were like pretty good friends.
As good of friends as Oswald had, they couldn't have. Kerry stated that they weren't close friends, but there was a bit of an affinity between them. Oswald was at that time studying Marxism, and so was Thornley. So they had various and many lengthy conversations about politics and religions and these type of things. So, the Thornley-Oswald relationship was probably the closest one that Oswald had during that period when he was in the Marines.
Yeah, and it sounds like, at least, like you said, he was writing a book about Oswald before the Kennedy assassination, so he saw something in Oswald that he could sink his teeth into.
Yeah, originally, Kerry was working on the book, which is called The Idle Warriors. He had, it was basically a composite character made up of Kerry and Oswald and a few other Marines he knew during that period. After Oswald defected to Russia, when Thornley heard about that, he went, "Oh, wow, that's pretty wild." From that point forward, the character of Johnny Shelbourne, who was based entirely on Oswald. And so, this is quite a curiosity that he was writing this book, based primarily on Oswald, a good 3 years before the assassination.
Yeah, that is pretty strange, and I'm sure it added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theorists.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Jim Garrison, the movie Oliver Stone's JFK is based on Jim Garrison's investigation. Garrison was DA in New Orleans. He believed, that Thornley was part of the group of conspirators involved in the Kennedy assassination, and particularly Thornley was one of the people who basically set up Oswald to be portrayed as a commie sympathizer and lone nut assassin. And Garrison felt that his book, The Idle Warriors, was basically used to present Oswald in that light.
And that's how the Oswald character pretty much is portrayed in the book, right? That he's sort of a dissident.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in The Idle Warriors. And then later, Thornley also ended up writing one of the first books on the Kennedy assassination called, aptly enough, Oswald, where once again he presented somebody who, was interested in Marxism and leftist politics. And, once again, Garrison thought that basically this was design, and that Thornley had been used to write this book once again to portray Oswald in this light.
And from what the best you can understand, was Thornley, was that the case, or do you think Thornley was just that he was just like a writer and thought it would be an interesting book?
I think he was just a writer, and he was trying to make a name for himself, and saw a golden opportunity there with Oswald.
Yeah.
Now, there's the distinct possibility that he was being used, and possibly even to write these books. But if that was the case, it was he was being used unwittingly, not to his knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's the area I get into in the prankster and the conspiracy about a group of shadowy characters that Thornley met in New Orleans prior to the Kennedy assassination, who he believed had sucked him into this group of conspirators that were involved in the assassination.
Yeah, that's right where I was going to go next. The character of brother-in-law.
Yeah.
And some of those conversations that Thornley had with, I forget the name of the other guy, but brother-in-law and his...
Slim Brooks.
Yes. Is it Lynn Brooks?
Slim Brooks.
Oh, Slim Brooks, yeah. Like the conversations about how they'd kill Kennedy and things like that. I mean, Thornley, he's back from Japan, and he ends up in New Orleans the same time Oswald is. So he's pretty much seems to be right in the thick of what's going on prior to the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, that's the whole weird thing about it, too, is that Oswald was in New Orleans, during the same period. Thornley was, in 60 and 61, and according to Thornley, they never met each other while they were there. The two individuals he met, brother-in-law and Slim Brooks, as you indicated, they had a lot of different conversations, and one of those was a theoretical conversation on how to assassinate a president, and in particularly John F. Kennedy. At the time, Thornley considered these conversations, to be nothing more than basically morbid theorizing.
Yeah.
Something fun to do. Thornley was a rabid anti-Kennedy. He hated Kennedy's politics, and some people would ask, why would somebody be having these conversations with somebody, and why was Thornley messed up or involved with all these shadowy characters? Thornley commented that he was getting to know all these curious individuals, brother-in-law and Slim Brooks, because they were involved with, or at least they claimed to be involved with the New Orleans underworlds, and that they had connections with government intelligence agencies and these type of stuff. And Thornley was basically seeking out these colorful characters because he planned to write a book on the New Orleans underworld during that period. And so, not long afterwards, Kennedy gets assassinated, and all these strange and curious conversations that Thornley had, he didn't think much of at the time. Then I guess we should fast forward to the late 60s, 67, 68, and during this time, Kerry was back in California, getting immersed in the counterculture movement, psychedelics, was involved in a mate-swapping group and all of these type things, when he ends up getting indicted by Jim Garrison, who's claiming that Thornley was involved with the CIA in the Kennedy assassination.
Now, let me just backtrack for a second here with you. After the assassination, how mainstream did the story of Thornley being in the Marines with Oswald, did that come out and people were like, what's that all about? Or was that sort of like just he knew about it and maybe only a handful of people
Well,
knew?
it was known, but it wasn't something that the national media really covered. Kerry did testify before the Warren Commission during that time, and basically just recounted his experiences with Oswald. So yeah, I did kind of make the national stage on that, but the Warren Commission basically just tried to put that baby to rest as soon as possible, and Kerry tried to capitalize with his book Oswald, but I don't think they really ever published that many copies to begin with, and if you can find one now, it's just a slim paperback volume, but they go for $50 to $100.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Did he now after it happened? He wasn't into the conspiracy aspect of it much. His attitude was more like, wow, that guy I knew in the Marines, he flipped out and shot the president.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was more his attitude.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the Garrison investigation started when Kerry started re-examining a lot of this stuff. Kerry initially thought that Garrison was off his rocker and that he was being persecuted. Garrison claimed a number of things. Once again, that Kerry was part of this apparatus in New Orleans that were affiliated with the CIA and the intelligence community that engineered the assassination, and that Kerry was one of the infamous Oswald doubles, impersonators running around Texas and New Orleans prior to the assassination, impersonating Oswald later to set him up as a patsy in the crime.
Yeah.
And so eventually the key suspect in Garrison's probe, Clay Shaw, played by, I think, Tommy Lee Jones in the movie.
Yep.
He was cleared of all charges. That was around 1970 or so, and shortly after the charges were dropped against Kerry Thornley. And fast forward about 2 or 3 years after that, Thornley picked up a copy of the Yipster Times, which was a hippie magazine put out during that period, and he saw a story in there that dealt with 3 tramps that were picked up in Dealey Plaza following the assassination. And basically the gist of the article was that these 3 tramps were actually intelligent agents in disguise who were involved in the Kennedy assassination, and the author of this article, A.J. Weberman, claimed that one of the individuals in question, who was known as the Old Man Tramp, was in actuality CIA agent E. Howard Hunt, notorious agent who was also involved in the Watergate break-ins. When Kerry saw this photo, he immediately, actually there's a couple photos, and one was E. Howard Hunt and the tramp, and comparing the two. When Kerry saw these photos, he immediately recognized E. Howard Hunt as being the shadowy character he had met in New Orleans way back when, known as brother-in-law. And at that point, Kerry began to suspect that he had been sucked into this whole Kennedy assassination craziness. And as the years progressed, he continued to evolve his theories, and eventually he believed he was mind controlled and all these other things, and basically used as a patsy like Oswald.
Now, It was interesting that you noted that during the Garrison investigation, the underground, they were sort of on Garrison's side.
Yeah, a lot of his former associates, people he involved with in the underground, first of all, Garrison was their knight in shining armor.
Yeah.
He was coming to bust the CIA and whoever for bringing down, the hope of a generation, Kennedy. And so when, Kerry started, he got indicted by Garrison, he felt unjustly persecuted. He basically became an enemy of Garrison, who was, the person that all the underground and the counterculture was promoting. So
yeah.
Kerry immediately found himself at odds with all the
all the people he was associated with before.
Yeah. So that kind of led to a certain amount of alienation, which eventually, one could attribute to Kerry's growing paranoia and his eventual, mental breakdown.
Now, did he expect to be indicted in this Garrison thing, or was that like a total surprise to him at the time?
He said it was a total surprise.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then after the fact, after he had adopted the conspiracy theory as opposed to what he thought originally, did he ever go back to Garrison and try and give him any more information maybe that he had held off before?
Well, yeah, that was the thing. He tried to set up a few meetings with Garrison so they could actually sit down and talk to it, but Garrison never agreed to meet him face to face. So he met with Garrison underlings, and they, the whole gist of the case was a lady named Barbara Reed claims that she saw both Oswald and Thornley together in New Orleans, and so when Thornley would meet with Garrison's people, and he'd tell them, "No, I never met with Oswald," and they were going, "You knew Oswald and the Marines. You wrote this book about him. You're living in New Orleans at the same time he is. This has to be the most fantastic coincidence ever, or you're lying."
Yeah.
And they just assumed he was lying, or that was Garrison's assumption. He was basing a lot of his case on that, so they never wanted to hear Thornley out about it.
How come you think he never met with? How come you think Garrison never met with Thornley? Was he just too busy, you think, or what?
Hard to say.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, Thornley, I noticed like how he changed from anti-conspiracy theory to pro-conspiracy theory, but also earlier throughout his life, as you detail in the book, he seems to change ideologies like on a whim, and then zealously dive into these ideologies.
Yeah.
Speak to that a little bit, because I thought that was kind of like, I wouldn't say strange, but I thought it was, a little odd. I was like, that's kind of, one day, he picks up an Ayn Rand book, and next thing you know, he's an ardent capitalist. And,
yeah.
So what do you think that was all about?
Well, have you ever picked up an Ayn Rand book?
No.
Oh, well, you ought to. You'll turn into an ardent capitalist.
Well, I picked up Atlas Shrugged, but it was really big.
Yeah.
I just didn't have the time, but I've heard really good things about that. And that's actually, I think, the book that Thornley read that turned him into a ardent capitalist.
Well, I think it was just a evolution that was going on with Thornley, and he was always open to new ideas, and he's one of those guys that got a certain idea or ideology or something would capture his imagination, and he would run with it for a while. Then something new would turn up, and that I'm kind of similar in that respect when you get into looking at conspiracy theories and all these different things, that there's a period of time when you're going, wow, there's something to this, and it's just where you buy into it.
Yeah.
But then eventually you get to the point where, hey, I really don't know anything for sure in this world, and move on to the next thing. I think that Thornley was, just had that adventurous nature and was an experimenter, and so, he was continually evolving, as we all are, really.
Yeah.
So I don't really think that was odd. Kerry was definitely zealous and passionate about things, so when he would dive into a theory, he would definitely write it out and take it to the hilt.
Yeah, yeah. After he embraced this conspiracy idea behind the JFK assassination, obviously, that most people believe in now, he really plunged headlong into it, and then he started accusing his other Discordians of being his handlers and things. He really went off the deep end, so to speak, for once he got into that conspiracy aspect.
And, you could attribute that to a few things. The more conspiracy-minded among us will say that he went off the deep end because he was a victim of mind control or whatever, or maybe he did too much acid, or, I think it might have been a number of things. Part of the alienation he felt and the persecution from the Garrison investigation, and I also document a long affair he had over many years that kind of came to an end at the same time as the whole Garrison investigation was ramping up. So there's many things you could contribute to his eventual breakdown. Yeah, but he did at one point really become an extreme paranoid, and suspected members of the Discordian Society as kind of being involved. He felt that Robert Anton Wilson, of all people, was his CIA handler at one point, and that the Discordian Society was basically a front for the CIA.
That's just, that just makes me laugh. Now, when
well, he was in, it sounds totally ludicrous, but at one point Kerry bought into that, and he was in pretty bad shape. He eventually worked his way out of that funk, and I think had a pretty good life until he died in the late 90s.
Yeah. Now, when he was at his most paranoid, do you think the other Discordian members, when was this? When you think he reached his nadir of paranoia?
It was around 76, 77, 78. I was able to lay my hands on a lot of the letters he wrote. I was fortunate enough to get a hold of Greg Hill's archives and Louise Lacey. They all saved all these letters Thornley wrote, and they're just the classic case of full-blown paranoia exhibiting itself on in the written page.
Now, do you think that a lot of his old buddies from that time period, from the 60s, from the early days of the Discordians, and at that point it had been like over 10 years, do you think they had sort of grown up and moved on and started families and stuff like that, and he was
well, they moved on, and they were doing different things, and Kerry kind of got stuck in that whole paranoid conspiracy theory, surrounding the Kennedy assassination, and he didn't evolve for a number of years, and so, but there was a pretty close bonding with some of those folks, Greg Hill and Bob Newport and Louise Lacey, where they kind of watched over Kerry in those years and took care of him and kind of nodded their heads and tried to be patient with him when he was going off the deep end.
Yeah, that's cool. It's nice that they...
he had a support group there that helped him through.
All right, because I had the fear that maybe they had sort of just turned their back on him at that point because he was getting worse and worse. But it sounds like they were pretty cool to him.
Yeah.
Now, towards the end of the book, you say that well, it seems that the idea that maybe he was schizophrenic comes up. What do you think that was? Do you think that was just people trying to place a label on him, maybe trying to figure out what made him so over the top paranoid, or do you think there was maybe some schizophrenia going on there?
Bob Newport, I've mentioned a couple times here, he was one of the original members of the Discordian Society, and he was also a clinical psychologist, and he diagnosed Kerry as a paranoid schizophrenic. But, it's pretty easy to pigeonhole people, and to quote Charles Manson, paranoia is a higher form of awareness. So I think, Thornley might have been one of those people tuned into some higher frequencies, that oftentimes geniuses are. The people who go crazy perhaps don't have the tools or don't learn to teach themselves ways to filter out too much of the noise so they can, go on living day to day.
Yeah. Now,
make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Do you think he was? So you're saying?
But
you don't think he was like sick or anything like that? That not like physically sick or anything like that, but sort of like that he had an ailment that if he had gotten some kind of treatment during those days, maybe he would have been a little better off.
I think he eventually did get treatment. I mean, I've heard different things from different people, but Bob Newport's of the impression that eventually he did go on medication in his later years, and that really helped him out.
Yeah, because during this time, it's important to know that he was sort of a vagabond, would you say?
Oh yeah, he was living in storm drains and hitchhiking across the country, and when he hit his lowest, he was doing what he could to survive, eating out of garbage cans and this type of thing, which is pretty sad for a brilliant person like he was, but
Yeah, well, life, it's a bitch.
Yeah.
Now, when you were writing the book or researching the book, did you ever meet Thornley?
I never did, unfortunately. I did correspond with him and talk to him on the phone, but we never met face to face, unfortunately.
And what was the?
I mean, when by the time I started writing the book, he was dead. When I had conversations with him, correspondence, that was in the early '90s, before I really had any intention of writing the books. When I got involved, with the underground zine movement, during a period of time, I was writing a lot of quote-unquote wacky people, just networking with strange people, more out of amusement than anything, and Thornley was one of those people I made contact with.
And what was that correspondence like? How did he look back on his life events?
I think what I did was just send him some different articles. I think I sent him an article I'd written in Paranoia magazine, kind of that claimed or entertained the theory that psychedelics had been introduced into the counterculture, basically to undermine it, by the CIA or whoever, and send stuff like that to Thornley just to get his feedback. I remember that particular piece he kind of called bullshit on, but in a nice and diplomatic way. So, those were the kind of exchanges we were having.
Yeah.
Nothing that was, directly talking about his life or anything. Like I said, once again, at that time, I had no intention of writing a book about him.
So it was more like trying to get perspective from someone who was like on the scene when things were going down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's an important, you want to get that kind of perspective. And you met a lot of these people who were in the Discordian Society after the fact, or corresponded with them when you were writing the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, really people, got to go spend some time with Robert Anton Wilson, and actually Greg Bishop accompanied me on that assignment. That Wilson and Bob Newport showed up for that interview, and that's one of the highlights of my life, meeting somebody like Bob Wilson. That guy is a big hero of mine.
Well, why don't you speak to that a little bit, what it was like meeting him, and you just pick his brain for a while and stuff? Is it cool?
Oh, yeah, it's he's just the ultimate gentleman. Invited us in, poured us a shot of scotch, and eventually got down to business, had some pizza with him, and stepped out on the porch and had a couple smokes, and his intellect is staggering, and so I felt a bit overwhelmed. What the hell is this guy talking to us for? But he's a very down to earth guy too, and made everybody at ease, even though he's at the point of his life where he's having kind of some medical problems post-polio, so he doesn't get around that well anymore. But
it sucks.
Yeah, great guy. One of the thrills of my life.
Nice. Now, what about Thornley's son? Did he read the book? Did you talk to him when you were writing the book at all? Have you heard any feedback about, or also Thornley's ex-wife? Have either of those two had anything to say about the book?
I was in contact with Kara Thornley, his ex-wife, and his son Craig, but they never did want to be interviewed. I think Craig was real wary of the whole thing, how a book on his dad was going to be handled, and also Greg's a artist in his own right, a filmmaker, so I think in a certain respect he's lived under the shadow of his father and his father's craziness, so he never wanted to get involved. Kara Thornley I also pursued for quite some time, and I think there's a lot of old wounds there. She never consented to being interviewed, although, both of them put me into contacts with other folks. I had a lot of lengthy interviews with Kerry's brother, Dick Thornley, which were quite helpful.
Nice.
So, you do the best you can, but it gets to the point where, these people don't want to talk about this, so it's time to move on.
Yeah, you don't want to harass them or anything.
No.
Now, you obviously, throughout this, you must have done a lot of research on the JFK assassination, or you've probably done a lot of research on it. Well,
I had done a lot previously, back in the early 80s or so. I remember one incident in particular. I was going to a local JC, and this is I think the late 70s, early 80s, sometime around there, and I saw a poster hung up there at the college saying the CIA killed JFK. I go, what in the hell is that about? I'd never been exposed to that before, so anyway, that got me looking into the Kennedy assassination, picked up one book and another, and after a while, it kind of spiraled out of control, but it became an obsession. So, I did a lot of reading and research over the years, and by the time I got around to writing the Thornley book, that background helped out.
Yeah. And so you sound like you're a pretty well-read researcher. What, in a nutshell, what do you think the Kennedy assassination was all about? I mean, you've probably delved into a lot of research that especially with this like Hoffman style stuff and the revelation of method and maybe the mind control and the ritual aspect. Where do you fall in the JFK assassination lore? What I found interesting was when I found out the Beatles were in Dealey Plaza on the same day of the assassination. Really? And what I believe is that the four Beatles used a triangulation of gunfire to shoot down JFK. Actually, that was a theory put forward by Cliff Clavin on Cheers. Oh, okay. Were they really in Dealey Plaza or no? No. All right. I hope not. That would be even more bizarre than I could wrap my head around.
You're asking me what I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody has their own sort of. Anyone who's looked into the JFK assassination probably has their own perspective.
I think it was engineered at a very high level. Elements of the government were involved. Also involved in the cover-up afterwards.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, I think, even though JFK got us heavily involved in Vietnam, he also put out an executive order shortly before his death, getting ready to pull all the advisors, as they called them, out of Vietnam and extricate ourselves from that whole mess. And, war is big business, and I think the military-industrial complex had such an interest in there that they couldn't
let that happen.
No, so they took him down.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty much the consensus point of view. What about the whole ritual aspects to the JFK assassination? A lot of people poo-poo that, or sort of think that's obfuscation. I've heard people say that. So, I mean, do you pretty much treat it as the ritual aspect, or you think that's just looking at finding things when you're looking for it?
Yes. But like I was saying before, it entertained various conspiracy theories, and, there could be something to that. Once again, it's hard for me to buy in 100% to any one theory, but, I don't disbelieve or poo-poo things either necessarily. Who knows? It certainly made entertaining reading.
That's for sure. Yeah, well, it's an interesting. I always find that sort of aspect of the JFK assassination pretty interesting. You can't really totally prove it or anything. So it's hard to, you know what I mean? You gotta file it away and be like, that's another interesting log for the fire here.
Yeah.
Now you dedicate the book to Jim Keith and Ron Bonds. Ron Bonds is a publisher who published the Kerry Thornley books, and I think some of the Jim Keith books, right?
Oh, yeah. He was the major publisher for Jim Keith at Illuminate Press.
And were you friends with Jim Keith at all? Did you know him? Were you corresponding with him during the time?
I corresponded with him quite a bit over the years. We used to bounce things off of each other, and I felt he was a colleague, compadre. We never met, and we always had plans to meet at some point. Never did, unfortunately. Interestingly enough, like you're saying, Ron Bonds at Illuminate was Keith's major publisher before Keith died. He'd actually basically became a partner with Ron Bonds and was doing a lot more work with Illuminate Press.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so they were working closely together. Get the timeline here correct. Keith died before Ron Bonds did. Jim Keith went to a Burning Man festival, which I'd been to a couple times, and I'm trying to remember the year. It was around, I want to say, 97 or 98, and it fell off the stage there, hurt his knee, went in the next morning for some routine medical operation and ended up dying. And so a lot of people have, conspiracy researchers have, raised some curious eyebrows about that.
Yeah.
Not long after, Ron Bonds ended up dying from food poisoning, which, also people like Ken Thomas at Steam Shovel Press thought was, once again, pretty damn curious.
Yeah, well, how well did you know Ron Bonds?
Once again, he was somebody I corresponded with on occasion. I pitched him some book ideas, and we exchanged information. He had a bunch of Kerry Thornley materials that I was trying to acquire from him before he died that I never did get a handle on. I'm not sure what they worse. So, he was one of the many people I'd talked to. Like, I said I corresponded with Thornley and Jim Keith and Ron Bonds and that whole network out there of people involved in the conspiracy scene that kind of had a similar sensibility about it, Jim Keith and I feel we were kind of kindred spirits in a sense, the way we approach, subject matter.
Now, how did you take his death? Well, you must have been pretty heartbroken when you heard he died.
Oh, it was just one of those things. Here we go again,
Yeah. Now, are you, I guess now it's been like maybe 8 years or something like that since he died. What do you think of the idea that maybe it was a conspiracy to kill him and or Ron Bonds? Is there much to that, do you think, or is that the sort of thing where when someone in the conspiracy field dies that it's almost automatically going to be blamed on their work?
Well, there's no particular smoking gun.
Yeah.
But it seemed pretty damn curious to me. Especially once again we talked about Bonds was the sole, the main publisher of Jim Keith. They both worked closely together on different projects. Keith had just become a partner with Ron Bonds, at the time of his death. They put out some pretty controversial material through Illuminate Press, like the book The Octopus.
Oh, yeah, that's a great book.
And that's, I worry about my friend Ken Thomas was the co-author of that book with Jim Keith.
Yeah.
Ken's really somebody who's talked about their deaths and looked into it more than I have.
Yeah.
But he thinks there was probably something sinister behind it all.
Now, yeah, you're pretty much colleagues then with Ken Thomas too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's written a lot of great books, and he's a pretty big name in the conspiracy research field.
He's America's most beloved conspiracy theorist. Actually, he prefers to be called a parapolitical researcher.
I like that a lot better. I might have to adopt that as well.
And his motto is all conspiracy, no theory.
Oh, that's even better. I like that. Would you consider him like a friend of yours? You guys are colleagues, correspondents, and stuff like that?
Yeah, we've met before. Once again, he's involved with a network of the Great Bishop and Rob Sterling at conformist.com. We've met up a few times. I'm forgetting a few of the folks, but we have these conspiracy conclaves now and then.
Nice, I hear you going.
Yeah.
Now, do you think, now obviously, Ken Thomas, he must be worried because these two dudes just up and died.
I don't know if he is. I think he's of the sentiment that you can't look back over your shoulder. He has a passion and love for what he's doing. So
yeah, that's cool.
You're either going to do what you felt you were put here to do, or don't do it and be unhappy, and might as well be dead anyway.
Yeah, you can't back down anyway when even if something like that happened to them, even if they were offed, you can't really then if you stop, then that's what part of the reason probably why they did it.
Yeah, and you lose if they're able to scare you or spook you out of doing what you want to do. Then they, quote unquote, they have won.
Now, in that sort of like network of people, where there's always these sort of mysterious deaths, and you seem like you're more well connected with that community than I am. Do you think there is sort of like an undercurrent? I wouldn't say of fear, but of hey, live now because you never know. You might write the thing that gets you killed. No, your next project could be the one that seals your fate type of attitude.
Mm-hmm. I think that's back there in the background. I don't know if any of us dwell upon that, but it's a possibility, especially after the deaths of Keith and Bonds, and the book The Octopus was based on Danny Casolaro, who allegedly or suicided, but I think we all know better.
Yeah. Now, did you know him at all?
No.
Okay, and then that pretty much wraps it up for the Kerry Thornley book. I had one other question for you. Outside of all of this was I didn't really see too much other than the George Bush article in The Beast of. I didn't see too much discussion on 9/11. So, as a conspiracy theory, parapolitical researcher.
I prefer to be called a crackpot historian.
Okay, here we go. As a crackpot historian, you were in this field way before 9/11. And 9/11 happened. That's sort of like, I think it really just was a huge, major event, obviously, in the lives of everybody in the world.
Yeah.
And especially for conspiracy theorists, because, that probably was the biggest event since the JFK assassination, and we know what the JFK assassination has spurned as far as conspiracy theory go. What do you think about 9/11 and what were your thoughts when it happened, and in retrospect now, like 4 or 5 years later, what do you think?
Well, when it happened, I was, it was a mind blower, obviously, like it was to everybody else.
Yeah.
It was one of those events like, the JFK assassination, or when John Lennon was killed. You remember exactly, where you were at when you heard about it, and what you were doing, one of those type things. So, it's a life-changing experience. As far as the particulars behind it, I haven't really investigated it too closely. I mean, there's a lot of other people involved in that.
But, yeah.
We talked about the revelation of the method, or a strategy of tension being created, and that was obviously a prime opportunity. If it was orchestrated by a conspiracy, it definitely helped achieve the design of a new world order. Call it what you want, of basically stripping us of certain rights and helping us get closer to a police state. And the same thing that happened with the Kennedy assassination. So without talking about the particulars, or, behind 9/11, you can look behind that and, see the same earmarks or design behind a lot of things, like the Oklahoma City bombing and all these other events that happened. There's the distinct possibility that there was a design behind it. It wasn't necessarily something that was created by, fundamentalist terrorists.
Now, do you think we're heading towards a new world order, or is it sort of like a mood in society that sort of is a permanent feeling that, like you said, they were saying that back in the 60s and 70s, and now they're sort of saying it now. Do you think they've always been saying it, and they'll be saying it like 20 years from now, and we still be relatively free?
In 20 years, maybe. You definitely, if you travel around the world, you see the globalization going on.
Yeah.
I was in China a few months ago, and, it's like going to a major city out here in the West somewhere. You have all the Gucci ads and all this type of stuff. There's this global commercialization that I think is all part of this, call it what you want, one world design, to basically, strip us of our culture and, all that's really important to us all, what's at the core of civilization, and homogenize it into this, basically commercialized society.
Yeah.
Do their shopping at strip malls and Walmart World, and
All right.
Sadly enough.
Yeah.
But, hey, you got to create your own world, you know?
Yeah, pretty much. You gotta go your own way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And what future projects can we look forward to hearing from you on? What are we going to see coming down the pipeline from Adam Gorightly?
We talked about James Shelby Downard, whose influence on Michael Anthony Hoffman.
Yeah, you touched on it a little bit, yeah.
So, yeah, a piece about the stuff they've done. I mean, I get into Michael Hoffman as well in this piece, and
awesome.
William Grimstad, who's part of this group, is talking about this whole mythology, perhaps, or whatever they've created in their works, you know, dealing with all these themes on the revelation of the method.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's either going to be a long article or a short book. And there's other things in kind of on the back burner. I'm thinking of writing another article kind of exclusively on this whole Tuesday Will Illuminati high weirdness.
Yeah.
And,
nice.
There's always something.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, that'll just be coming out sometime around whenever.
I'll let you know. I'll put you on my mailing list. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Nice. And I'll spread the word.
You don't mind being spammed?
What's that?
If you don't mind being spammed?
I'm used to it now.
Okay.
Tell the people your website and the books that they can get there, and give them the whole spiel here. Give them the rundown.
Yeah, the easiest way to go to get the books is through adamgorightly.com. And, you know, there's links there to Amazon or whoever to get them. And you also get signed copies if you want to go that route. It doesn't cost you any more. They have the 4 books on the website. One is the Manson book, The Shadow over Santa Susana, Black Magic, Mind Control, and the Manson Family Mythos. I had all these long titles in the Kerry Thornley book, The Prankster and the Conspiracy, the story of Kerry Thornley and how he met Oswald and inspired the counterculture. Third book, it's a chat book. It's available also through wingtv.net. They're the publisher. It's called Adam Gorightly on Death Cults. And lastly, The Beast of Adam Gorightly, Collected Rantings, 1992 through 2004. Those are all available on the adamgorightly.com website. I also have a second website devoted exclusively to the Manson book, which is mansonmythos.com.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, definitely check out the books, everybody. I really enjoyed them. The 2 I read so far. I'm going to be picking up the other one soon. And I'm sure I'm going to like those a lot, too, because I just really dug into the Beast of and the Prankster and the Conspiracy. Those are both great, and I highly recommend the books. And thank you very much, Adam Gorightly, for stopping into Binnall of America Audio. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and I'm sure the people who listen are going to really dig in and enjoy the conversation we had.
Yeah, thank you.
That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. I want to thank Adam Gorightly for sitting down and talking to us. I want to thank Leslie and Chiron of BinnallofAmerica.com for your help and support with the audio series. And, of course, I want to thank all you great listeners out there in the Internet world. Hope you're enjoying the audio series. Stay tuned for more madness from BinnallofAmerica.com. You can find more stuff from us at www.binnallofamerica.com. Next week, it is to be announced. You have no idea. I am taping 2 monstrously huge interviews. 24 hours from now, I will announce who will be the first of those 2 guests to be featured sometime next week at binnallofamerica.com. And, of course, next Saturday, be here for the first of those 2 interviews. I can't tell you who they are yet. I don't like to announce any names until the interviews are in the can, so you're not disappointed if someone bails at the last minute. But I will simply say that these 2 gentlemen I will be speaking to tomorrow in 2 separate interviews are both giants in the field of ufology, so I think you're going to freak out when you see who is on tap for the rest of December at Binnall of America Audio Season 1. So, while you think of that, enjoy the rest of your week. You'll be hearing from me next Saturday. This is Tim Binnall, signing off.